What would your younger self say about how your family turned out?
My phone buzzed late in the afternoon, and when I glanced down expecting some boring group chat update or maybe a work notification, I froze at the words glowing on the screen. It was from my sister Rachel, the one who never wasted an opportunity to remind me that in her eyes I had chosen the wrong path in life. The message read, "Sorry, tonight's dinner is just for the successful ones." For a moment I just stared at it, blinking, because it was written so casually, as if she was letting me know they had run out of space at the table, or that I should just catch them next time. But there was no next time implied, no trace of apology. Just a sharp little knife buried in a smiley tone. My chest tightened as I realized what it meant. The entire family was getting together to celebrate something, and I had been deliberately left off the guest list. I sat down on the edge of my bed with the phone still in my hand, rereading the words until they blurred. They didn't even try to come up with a kinder excuse, something about scheduling or distance. No, they had gone straight to the point, labeling me as the unsuccessful one, unworthy of sitting at the same table. I could already picture them, my parents in their carefully chosen outfits, Rachel with her endless stories about her promotion and her perfect husband, maybe even a few cousins bragging about their new cars or houses, all of them nodding and laughing while raising glasses of wine. And me? I was supposed to stay home like a forgotten child, eating alone and pretending not to care. The truth is, it wasn't the first time they had dismissed me. My whole life had been a parade of lowered expectations from them. I was the one who never quite fit the family's definition of achievement, the one who didn't follow the same formula of getting a safe corporate job, marrying early, and buying a house in the suburbs. I chose a riskier path, something I believed in but which they couldn't measure in neat little milestones. Every family dinner turned into a performance review where I was always graded the lowest. They compared my life to Rachel's and found me lacking. It didn't matter how hard I was working or how close I was to something big, because all they saw was the absence of visible results. Tonight's exclusion was simply the final stamp of disapproval, an official declaration that I no longer belonged. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge, but the shelves mocked me with half-empty cartons and a container of leftovers I didn't even want. The silence in my apartment pressed in heavier than usual, so I picked up my phone again and scrolled through a delivery app, finally settling on some greasy Chinese food. Ordering takeout felt both pathetic and defiant, like if they thought I didn't deserve a seat at their table, I'd make my own miserable little feast instead. When the food arrived, I spread it out on the coffee table, cartons open, chopsticks in hand, and forced myself to eat while the glow of the television flickered in the background. Every bite was bitter, not because of the taste, but because of the weight of humiliation pressing against my ribs. I imagined them toasting each other, the clink of glasses, the laughter carrying across the restaurant, and I sat there chewing noodles with no one to talk to, just me and the sound of the anchor droning on in the background. The irony stung. Family is supposed to be unconditional, yet mine had decided success was the price of admission, and apparently, I was too poor to pay. Halfway through my meal, the volume of the television cut through my thoughts. The words "breaking news" rolled across the screen, and the anchor's voice took on the kind of gravity reserved for monumental announcements. I glanced up absent-mindedly, my chopsticks hovering, and then I nearly dropped them when the headline appeared in bold letters. My name was there. My actual name, not someone with the same initials, not a coincidence, but me. The report was about a major deal that had just closed, a $120 million contract signed earlier that day, and my signature was the one attached to it. The camera even showed the press release photo, my face smiling awkwardly under harsh lights, the same photo I had posed for weeks earlier when I didn't even know if the deal would hold together. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. For a moment I thought I had hallucinated it, that the sting of Rachel's text had scrambled my brain. But no, there it was again, my name repeated by the anchor as she explained the significance of the agreement, how it marked a turning point in the industry, how it was being praised by analysts. And all I could think was that right now, as my family sipped wine and bragged about their minor victories, my face was being broadcast into living rooms across the country. They were probably still at dinner, oblivious, while the world was learning that the unsuccessful one had just pulled off something bigger than all of them combined. I set down my food, no longer hungry, my hands trembling as the weight of what was happening sank in. The humiliation of being excluded hadn't even had time to fade, and already the universe had thrown me this thunderbolt. They didn't invite me because they didn't think I belonged among the successful. Yet here I was, watching proof that I had just leapfrogged every single one of them. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. The cartons of Takeout sat untouched on the table as I leaned closer to the screen, unable to look away from the ticker scrolling across the bottom. It was real, all of it. And I realized with a jolt that when my family finally left their dinner and saw the news, their phones would light up with the same headline that was blazing across mine. My exclusion had just become the biggest mistake of their lives, and they didn't even know it yet. I did not move for what felt like a long stretch of held breath, because the sound from the television threaded through my apartment like an announcement from another planet, while the smell of cold sesame noodles clung to the air. And I sat there thinking about how the same family that had just sorted me into a category called not good enough would at some point walk out of their cheerful dinner into a world where my name was running along a news ticker that did not stop to ask for anyone's permission. The anchor spoke about the deal as if she had been living inside my calendar for the past year, mentioning the late-stage negotiations, the months of due diligence, the technical milestones that had to be hit in careful sequence, and the very quiet victories that no one ever applauds because they arrive as updated spreadsheets, amended clauses, and signatures that look unremarkable until you realize they are the hinges on which entire futures swing. And hearing her describe work that I had done mostly in silence felt like someone had finally flipped on a light in a room where I had been speaking into the dark. What no one at my family's table ever wanted to hear, because it did not fit the legend they wrote for me, was that I had been building something that did not exist in a frame they understood. And that while they measured worth in titles and holiday photo backdrops, I measured it in survivals, in problems put to sleep after too many coffees, in the number of people who could do their jobs more safely and more quickly because my team and I got a hard thing to bend, and as the anchor explained, how this $120 million contract would change a very specific corner of a very large industry, I felt the knot I had carried for years loosen just enough to let in a little air. I remembered the demo that crashed 5 minutes before a make-or-break call, the vendor that tried to play games until I took their leverage away with a deadline they did not see coming, the investor who smirked at me like he was commenting on a shoestring craft project until the numbers shut him up, and I felt an electric steadiness move through me, the kind that does not come from surprise or luck, but from an audit of what you endured to arrive here. The absurdity of the timing hit me so hard I laughed, not a cute little giggle, but the kind of laugh that spills out because the universe has decided to write a punchline bigger than anything you could have drafted yourself, and I thought about Rachel's text again. The breezy cruelty of it, and I did a thing that was petty and perfect at the same time. I opened my camera, framed the television so that my name and the headline sat square in the shot, left a corner of the coffee table visible with the sad carton of dumplings and the crumpled delivery receipt, and I layered the screenshot of her message in the top corner like a caption no one could miss. Then I posted it to my story with visibility set to everyone in my contacts, because if we were playing the who counts as successful game, I wanted the scoreboard to be public, not as a scream. Not as a speech, but as a mirror that reflected exactly what had been said to me earlier and exactly what the world was saying now. I did not add a victory caption, I did not tag anyone, and I did not gloat, because the picture already told the joke in a way even the most stubborn relative would understand, and that tiny action, that small act of digital graffiti, felt like the first step of revenge that did not require me to knock on any doors or beg for recognition, since the people who wrote me off would now have to trip over my face on their phones whether they liked it or not. While the story began to rack up silent views, I turned the volume back up and listened as the segment cut to analysts, the kind of gray-suited prognosticators who love to narrate momentum once it has become safe. And I let them talk about valuations and market appetite and growth narratives while I stood in my kitchen, washed a single plate, and realized I was not shaking anymore. Then the vibration started, a low insect hum against the coffee table that built into a steady rattle as my phone lit up with names that had not found time for me in months. First, a distant cousin who only ever resurfaces when she needs a connection. Then an aunt who swears she has always believed in me even though her belief usually arrives with a list of suggestions for how I could be more like Rachel. And then, as if the algorithm of family politics had decided to push the heaviest hitters, my mother's name took over the screen, followed by my father's, followed by the group chat that I had been unceremoniously removed from last year after a disagreement about whether my life choices qualified as reckless. I watched the device vibrate its little heart out and I did not touch it, because in that moment ignoring their calls felt like a long overdue boundary drawn with a quiet hand, and I decided to twist the knife just a little more, not out of hatred, not out of the desire to make anyone cry, but because I needed them to sit in the same cold space they had asked me to occupy. I opened my settings, created a custom auto-reply that would go only to numbers in my favorites list, which currently included exactly the people now flooding my screen, and I wrote a single line that looked familiar for a reason that would not be lost on them. Sorry, tonight's conversation is just for the successful ones. Then I toggled it on for the next few hours and placed the phone face down, letting the message do the work that my voice no longer had to do, and as the television cut to another angle with my name still scrolling by like proof I did not need to defend, the group chat pinged again. A new bubble popping up that I could see even with the screen dimmed, because my sister had decided to type. And the preview showed the beginning of a sentence that promised trouble and apology in the same breath. Can we talk right now? It's urgent. The auto-reply did its work like a quiet assistant who understood the assignment better than anyone in my bloodline ever had. Because within minutes the polite machine sent my one sentence mirror back to 3 people who had spent years polishing speeches about tough love. And their responses arrived as voicemails that stacked into a little tower of panic on my screen while the newscaster kept repeating my name as if she were practicing scales. So I picked up the phone at last and, instead of allowing any actual conversation that would give them room to rearrange the facts, I pressed play and listened to each message carefully, the way you listen to an audiobook whose plot you already know but still hope will surprise you. Rachel went first, her voice pitched too high, insisting that the text had been a joke that landed wrong, then pivoting mid-sentence into a confession that did not sound like an apology so much as a plea, because she admitted Mom had floated the line first and she had typed it because we were just trying to keep the dinner focused, which translated neatly to we wanted photographs and an easy night without your complicated career and your opinions. And near the end of her message, I heard the moment the restaurant televisions flipped to the breaking news segment, because someone near her gasped, chairs scraped, and Rachel suddenly inhaled like she had swallowed fire, then said my name in the round. Stunned way people say it when they have to reconsider a person they thought was safely filed away under a label that requires no thought. My mother's voicemail came laced with that soft voice she saves for funerals and scholarships, the one that gently suggests she has always been your biggest fan even when the historical record would not support that claim, and she started with how proud she felt, how she had always known I would find my lane, before taking a quick exit down the road of revisionist history by saying the dinner had been last minute and themed. Yes, she used the word themed, as if there were party stores where you could buy napkins that said sorry, only children who hit milestones may enter, and she wrapped the whole thing in a bow shaped like family unity. Which made me laugh, because unity does not typically involve locking one person outside the building and then printing a program about the benefits of togetherness. My father's message was shorter but denser, packed with practical questions about how exposed I was now, whether my personal number needed changing, whether investors would expect me to comment on the news cycle, and could we please schedule a time tomorrow to speak as a family, because there were things we needed to align on, and the word align hit me in the sternum, because it sounded like we were a company with an org chart, not 4 people who had just categorized one of their own as decorative clutter. As the messages unspooled, cousins began to text, 2 uncles attempted to call, and a family friend I had not heard from since high school sent a picture of the television screen with 6 heart emojis that I did not acknowledge. And although my first instinct was to keep ignoring everyone until the dust settled and the ticker moved on to the next scandal or merger, a bright, slightly wicked idea lit up behind my eyes, the kind of small, efficient revenge that does not require a speech, a shovel, or an audience because it borrows the exact shape of the wound and returns it to sender with the postage prepaid. I opened my calendar app, created an event for the following evening, and typed a title that would be familiar on site, Dinner for the Successful Ones, set the location to my apartment with the note that there would be takeout and no dress code, only honesty. Then filled the description field with 3 bullet points that I knew would thread the needle between humor and consequence. Bring a story about a time you failed and did not die. Bring a sentence in which you define success without using a job title or a price tag. Bring an apology in complete sentences with no thesaurus words and after double-checking the guest list, which included only immediate family, because revenge loses flavor when it is diluted. I hit send and watched the invitations fire off into the same phones that had spent the last hour ringing mine. I could have left it there, but a cleaner edge presented itself. So I opened a food delivery app and scheduled a very large order of the exact dishes I had eaten alone, cartons of dumplings and sesame noodles and broccoli that always tastes like a gym smells, with a delivery time set for the start of my event, so that when they arrived, if they arrived, we would all eat what I had eaten while they were toasting each other without me, and in the special instructions I asked the driver to add a handwritten note that read, "Reserved seating always exists. Some people just build the table," because if we were going to do symbolism, I wanted it boxed, stapled, and still warm. Then, to make sure the point landed without any blood on the floor, I changed the privacy on my earlier story from everyone to close friends, removed half the list, left the people who had called, and added a second frame that was a screenshot of the calendar invite with the caption "Attendance optional, clarity mandatory," not because I needed the digital theater, but because sometimes you have to pin a message to the corkboard so no one can walk by saying they never saw it. The replies came back fast, as if my apartment had suddenly become an emergency management center. Rachel accepted the invite immediately and sent a separate text that said she would bring dessert and could we talk beforehand so we did not make a scene. Which I found darkly funny because scenes had been made with or without me my entire life, while my mother tentatively marked maybe, followed by another voicemail about logistics and how she could help, and my father declined the calendar block, but texted that he expected a call tonight because he did not want to discuss family matters in a meeting format, which, you have to admire, was consistent with his refusal to treat me like a partner in decisions that affected me. I let the status icons sit in their little row, noted the mix of performative eagerness and managerial resistance, and told myself I would hold the line, not because I wanted to punish anyone forever, but because I wanted to see who could walk through a door labeled humility without spraining an ankle. Then the night did that thing where time folds, because the news cycle rolled on to weather and politics. The city outside softened to a hush, and I started to feel the heaviness of a long year pressing between my shoulders, so I turned off the television, stacked the untouched cartons into the fridge, and stood in the quiet that used to feel like loneliness and now felt like control, when the building intercom sliced the air with a sound that does not ask permission, a bright metallic buzz. That repeated, then repeated again, and when I pressed the button and said hello, the voice that answered identified itself too quickly, too brightly, as the concierge, who explained that there were 3 visitors in the lobby insisting they were family and asking to be led upstairs without notice, and in the background I heard my mother say my name, my sister start to talk over her, and my father coughed the way he does when he is about to declare a process, and I smiled in a way that did not reach my eyes because my clever little calendar should have bought me one night of peace, but apparently, the dinner for the successful ones had decided to arrive early and uninvited, which left me with a single decision to make as the buzzer lit up again and again, not unlike a heartbeat that refused to slow. The buzzer kept chewing at the quiet like a small animal determined to turn metal into dust, and although every instinct told me to let them stand under the fluorescent lobby lights until they invented a new definition of patience, I pressed the intercom and answered with the kind of voice I reserve for negotiations that require both warmth and barbed wire, explained that I would come down in 5 minutes on the condition that they agreed to 3 simple ground rules I would text them immediately, and before my mother could launch into the preamble about love and misunderstanding, I ended the call, typed the message in the same calendar thread I had created earlier: no interruptions, no revisionist history. Each of you answers 3 prompts before you ask me for anything, and slipped on shoes while the television continued to parade my name past graphics that looked cartoonish in the soft apartment light. I took the elevator down with the steady exhale of someone who knows she will not be ambushed in her own lobby, because I had already decided we would have this conversation under my terms, in full view of the concierge and the beige security camera that blinks like an impartial referee. And if they wanted closeness, they could start with respect, which is proximity's less glamorous but more durable cousin. They were waiting by the ficus that has outlived 3 property managers and any number of tenant dramas. My mother in a cardigan that tried to say softness, while her mouth arranged itself into battlefield diplomacy. My father in the suit he wears whenever he wants to project authority into rooms that do not require it, and Rachel in a coat too new to be accidental, holding a bakery box that probably meant to announce sweetness without calories. And for a moment we looked like a family posing for a very awkward stock photo about reconciliation. I gestured to the building's lounge area, a modest arrangement of chairs across from a television mounted on mute, and watched their eyes flick toward the screen where the crawl still repeated the headline that had thrown a grenade into the dinner they were so eager to protect. Then placed 3 index cards and a pen on the low table the way a teacher lays out a test, explained calmly that each card had the same 3 lines printed on it: tell me about a time you failed and did not die, define success without using a job title or a price tag, write an apology in complete sentences without the words if or but, and that I would not be speaking until the cards were filled. Because tonight I was not the child at the door asking to be let in, I was the adult deciding which doors remained open. My father bristled first, not with anger exactly, but with the stance of a man who prefers his conversations to be conference calls in which he chairs the agenda, and he began to say we did not need forms, we needed a family discussion. At which point I held up one finger like a conductor cueing a single violin and pointed to the rule about interruptions, and to his credit, he closed his mouth and picked up the pen, the smallest compliance, but also the most significant. Because if the rules could hold for him, they could hold for anyone. My mother smiled the way you smile when a nurse asks you to breathe deeply before a needle, then bent over her card with such concentration that I almost felt sorry for her, while Rachel, who has always been faster with performance than with introspection, wrote quickly, crossed out entire lines, and finally sat back with a look that said she had just completed a marathon she did not train for and wanted someone to hand her a blanket and a medal. I let the silence do its old reliable work, the kind of quiet that makes people hear themselves, and when the elevator doors opened with a ding that belonged to some other story, my delivery arrived on schedule. The same cartons I had eaten from alone the night before, and I signed for the order with a flourish that I admit was theatrical while the concierge carried the bags to our table as if they were offerings in a ceremony none of us had rehearsed. We ate because it is harder to lie with chopsticks in your hand, and between bites of broccoli that tasted like regret and noodles that stuck to their own logic, I invited them to read their cards aloud in the same order they had protested. Which meant my father went first, and he surprised me by telling an unvarnished story about a deal he had pushed too hard in his 30s, how the client had walked, how he had sat in his car feeling like a warehouse full of mirrors had collapsed on him, and how he learned to walk back in and admit the thing he feared most, that he was wrong. His definition of success stumbled, then steadied into something about sleep and the ability to look at your own emails without a stomach ache. His apology was not pretty. But it did not contain the words if or but, and, because I am not made of stone, I nodded once, a tiny permission slip that said I heard him. My mother followed with a confession disguised as a memory that she had often confused safety with. love and had clipped my wings to keep me from falling because she could not bear to watch me bleed, that her definition of success had for too long been limited to the avoidance of pain, and that she was sorry for shrinking me to fit rooms that made her less afraid. I felt the apology land with the weight of an inheritance no one knows how to spend. Rachel began with a joke that died in her throat, then told me about the year she stayed in a marriage 3 months past its expiration date because the photographs were good and the holidays were close. That she measured success in applause and had assumed the world's clapping hands proved she was loved, and that she sent the text because she wanted one night where she could pretend life was simple, which, she admitted, translated to a night where I was not there to complicate it by existing. Her apology wobbled, then formed into a sentence that did not ask me to do any work on its behalf. I listened, swallowed, and then collected the cards like exhibits, laid them next to the bakery box as if we were making a still life about consequences, and pulled 3 sealed envelopes from my bag. Placed one in front of each of them with the same care you use to present passports at a border, explained that inside they would find 2 items, a printed screenshot of the text that had excluded me, and a receipt for a donation I had made that afternoon in their names, equal to the approximate cost of their dinner, to a community college fund that pays the application fees for adults who were told seats at certain tables did not belong to them. The fund named after my grandmother who fed everyone who crossed her threshold and never once asked for a resume. It was revenge dressed as generosity, and I will not pretend otherwise, because even as I felt the clean click of the trap closing without blood, I saw my mother's eyes float toward the receipt amount and then back to the bakery box as if she needed a sugar anchor. My father turned the envelope over twice like there might be a clause he could renegotiate, and Rachel, who responds to discomfort with volume, asked if this meant I was refusing to forgive them tonight, which was an impressive attempt to reposition herself as the one offering absolution, and I said, no, it means you will not buy it with urgency, dessert, or a public performance, and that forgiveness is not the same as access. A sentence that blew out into the lobby like steam from a valve that had been waiting years to open. I stood, thanked them for coming, told them tomorrow's dinner would proceed as planned under the rules already sent, and that leaving now would be the only proof they were capable of following. Instructions without a spotlight. My mother rose first, then my father, and finally Rachel, who looked at me like she wanted to speak a new language and did not yet have the words. And just as the elevator doors opened to swallow them, I felt my phone vibrate with a call from a number I did not recognize, but with an area code that belongs to the office where certain family documents live in very careful drawers. A neatly urgent label reading private caller lighting the screen, and as I pressed accept and said hello, a voice that knew my last name before I gave it asked if I had a moment to discuss a matter regarding the trust my parents had established years ago, specifically a clause that might require my signature before the end of the week, which rewrote the air between the closing elevator doors and my throat into something dense and flammable that I did not yet know how to breathe. The attorney spoke with that careful calm people use when they are walking you through a room where the floor might conceal a hatch, explained that a routine review had revealed an old clause buried like a relic in the family trust. A clause that listed me as a contingent signatory for any amendment affecting charitable disbursements and real property transfers, which sounded like estate jargon until I realized it translated into leverage that wore a polite blazer. And while the elevator swallowed my parents and Rachel, I listened to this stranger explain that my signature would be required if my parents wanted to accelerate a sale they had been contemplating or if they intended to redirect a portion of funds that had long been earmarked for causes my grandmother had insisted upon, and somewhere between the part about notarization and the part about deadlines, I felt a slow smile assemble itself, not the gloating kind, more like the expression you get when a locksmith hands you a key you did not know you already owned. I told the attorney I appreciated the call, that I would review whatever documents needed reviewing, and that I preferred to handle the matter in writing rather than in a conference room where decades of family choreography could start tap dancing on the truth. He agreed, promised to email, and thanked me using my full name, as if the syllables were a stamp. I slept the way people sleep after a long verdict, then woke to a morning that did not wait for permission, because my phone was already lit with messages that alternated between logistics and emotion. My mother offering to help set the table for the dinner I had scheduled, my father proposing an agenda in bullet points like this was a quarterly review, Rachel sending a photo of an expensive tart as if sugar could launder memory. And beneath their impatience ran the steady current of the news cycle, which had decided to keep my name in circulation for another day, the anchors now inviting me to comment on leadership and grit, words I have learned to translate into "Can you make your suffering sound inspiring for 5 minutes?" I brewed coffee and wrote 3 emails, one to the attorney requesting the specific language of the clause, one to my accountant flagging the potential implications, and one to myself that contained a single sentence I wanted to remember when the room filled later. You did not ask for this moment, but you earned it. Use it without cruelty and without apology. By early evening, my apartment had been rearranged into a place that could hold a conversation without hiding, the coffee table cleared for the same index cards as before, the cartons arriving on schedule with their reliable perfume of sesame and honest salt. A single empty chair placed where I would sit facing the door, not as a throne but as a reminder to my spine that I was not waiting to be chosen anymore. They arrived in a cluster, bearing flowers and that tart and a sense of ceremony I did not feed, and once we had exchanged the choreography of hellos, I explained that before we spoke about forgiveness or future holidays or who hurt who when, we would address 2 items with the precision they deserved. First, the donation receipts I had issued in their names yesterday would be joined tonight by a second contribution in my name, larger, directed to the same community college fund, a gesture not of punishment but of alignment with the woman who taught us that a door is not a door if the hinge is rusted shut. Second, I had learned of the trust clause and would sign if and only if we amended the language to restore the original charitable allocations and to create a new scholarship under my grandmother's name that prioritized applicants who had been told, explicitly or implicitly, that rooms were for other kinds of people. My mother began to cry the quiet way that does not ask for a tissue. My father asked for the draft terms like the businessman he is even when he does not want to be, and Rachel nodded too quickly, promising to help, which I suspected meant she would call a designer for the scholarship page and take a photo holding a giant check. I let the thoughts flicker and then go, because I was aiming for impact, not purity. We ate and we talked and, in a small moment I am not too proud to admit I engineered, I asked them to repeat the definitions of success they had offered last night. Then I slid a stack of blank cards their way and asked them to copy those definitions in their own handwriting a second time, not as a test, but as muscle memory, so that on some future day when the news ticker carries a different name and the group chat is buzzing about somebody else's vacation or divorce, they might pause, open a drawer, and find in their own letters an argument for decency. The signatures for the trust amendment would come later that week with a notary who would sit at this same table and stamp the papers as if validating the air in the room. For now, my revenge was simple and thorough. A redirection of money and meaning that did not humiliate anyone but also did not let them wriggle free, and when my father raised his eyes from the draft terms and said, "This is fair," I felt something in my chest unclench. That had been a fist since I was young enough to measure love in gold stars. As the evening thinned, Rachel lingered, boxed the tart she had brought untouched, and asked the kind of question that appears after the adrenaline has burned off, whether I would ever come to one of her dinners again. Not the big holiday ones where the performance budget is high, just a Tuesday where we leave our resumes at the door and sit in sweatshirts, and I told her the truth that tastes like medicine, that I did not know yet. That rebuilding is not a montage with a cheerful song that some days you want to carry your new key around your neck and lock every door just to feel the click, and other days you remember a joke only your sister laughs at and you find yourself setting one more place. She nodded, said she could live with not knowing for a while, then hugged me like she was learning a new sport. After they left, the apartment went quiet in that alive way that follows storms, my phone blinking with a message from the attorney confirming the revised language, another from the newsbooker offering a primetime slot, and a third from an unknown number containing nothing but a photograph of my grandmother at her kitchen table, elbows planted, smiling like she already knew the punchline. I stood there with the phone warm in my palm and thought about how victory can be loud or it can be architecture, about how revenge can be a donation receipt stapled to an apology, about how forgiveness can be a door you leave cracked not because you trust the people on the other side, but because you trust yourself to close it if they mistake your kindness for weakness. And when the screen went dark, I let it, because some endings are not period marks. They are breath held between two sentences, and you decide when to speak again.